Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today we're finally tackling language arts education in elementary education in Virginia. That was too many ends. But shout out, yes, to all my OGs that have been there since the beginning. Yes, it's been 5 years and I still am wearing this shirt. So actually, I'm not too mad at the English standards of learning for Virginia. It actually isn't that bad. I will just talk, so I'm not gonna actually read through the SOLs because it's not as specific as the other SOLs where they need to know specific things, facts and information. So generally in education, it's not just a Virginia thing or a Virginia SOLs thing. It's English is where you learn to read and write, and so you can't argue with that. So you should be able to learn and read and write. But the problem is that a lot of kids, this is where privilege comes into play. Not technically, but it will be harder for the teacher if a child comes in with literally nothing, no background information. Reading is all about, reading comprehension in school and reading in general is just based on psychologists, the background knowledge you have. So it's going to be a lot harder for a teacher if a student comes in with absolutely no background knowledge. Because parents, they're supposed to be the first teachers. Actually, that's the big thing, big concept or big idea here is that parents are supposed to be your first teacher. And a lot of parents who have the resources, they're the ones who teach you how to read. They're the person who introduces you to your alphabet. And some kids don't get that, maybe because their parents will speak English or they don't have time. But that's a big issue that we need to address in school. And then so students who already have that background knowledge will get further ahead, while those that don't will fall behind. And it is really frustrating when the standards, I guess that's where the standards, I have an issue with the standards, is that kids who aren't able to read are expected to pass the 4th grade SOL reading test, but they can't even read it. So I think that's dumb. Or we can't meet every student's need if we are teaching to this test and they're expected to pass this test when some of them can't even read. And if they can't read, then they're not gonna be able to read it and understand it, and they're not gonna pass the test, obviously. So that's kind of dumb. But in terms of reading, it's pretty simple, read. And I like how the idea is for more culturally relevant text. So that was a really fun thing about teaching reading this past school year, was that I got to choose a lot of interesting kids books, children books, fiction, but picture books are so fun, and they're so fun to read, and kids love them. And I love discovering new books from different point of views. That was one of my favorite parts about teaching. So that's really cool. In terms of 4th grade, specifically, so I think Fairfax County has really, so from when I first taught, it was very the school I taught at, the strategy was teach to the test, and we would practice directly. Here are the skills students need to know. For example, identify sensory words. We would focus specifically sensory words, teach them specifically, give them a phrase, because basically preparing them to answer the questions on the test, which of these appeals to sight and which of these appeals to smell, specifically. Whereas in Fairfax County, the curriculum was it was more broad in that you could learn. It was a skill that students had to do, but it wasn't teaching to the test. Whereas what is this specifically? Or, for example, identify cause and effect relations. We weren't teaching that specific skill. We were applying it, incorporating into a whole reading lesson. So I thought that was kind of cool, but I was a little worried about how the students would perform on the test because they weren't exposed to that. And actually it was a unit that we didn't get to cover because of COVID, and students didn't even need to take the test this year, which was awesome. I mean, for me and for the students, because I had no idea how my students were going to perform on the test. I think like my job would have been on the line. I honestly don't know, and I don't want to know what would have happened if like COVID never happened. Because I was being evaluated, and maybe I could, it would have been nice to know what would have happened and how my kids would have done, but to see how effective this Fairfax County model of teaching is. But so Fairfax County had units, like nonfiction, where we would focus on these things, but it wasn't like explicitly taught. However, that kind of information is useful for kids who aren't familiar with tests, to beating that test bias, and for kids who need practice with that. What I was going to say about, because of the way reading is taught in Fairfax County, it is very, like, the standards are really high, man. Like, the stuff we teach, like, I had to teach, it was so hard. Like, there would be silence in my classroom, and I'm like, guys, tell me, like, why are you being so quiet? Like, what's going on? And they're like, well, the questions you ask are just really hard. And I feel like sometimes my lessons were, like, at the level of, like, for high school kids or, like, college kids. I do admit, like, the lessons were pretty hard. Like, the questions I was asking was, like, way too much, way too hard for, like, a 4th grader. Yeah, for example, we were reading a book and I was like trying to get them to identify with like other characters, when really they could just identify with the main character, which was the girl. They couldn't identify with the other characters because personally it would not relate to them. So going back to that whole background knowledge thing. So I was expecting them to do a lot more than they could actually do. And I get that it's like, make it harder so that on the test they can succeed. But I don't know how well I taught reading this year. I don't remember like how my teachers did it when I was a kid, but like in addition to whole group lessons, which is like you teach to the grade level, there's also like you can meet with individual groups. That's where you focus on the students' individual needs. And I had a problem with that. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about small group, and then we're gonna talk about independent work. So I had a problem with that, and that going along with independent work is we would read like level books, and that's like great to like help them read, but it's like they're not interested in the books that you choose. Like the topics they're not interested in, and I hated that. And I hated independent work time, independent reading, because kids, like, you know how I view forcing students to do things. I don't like that. So a lot of teachers are able to get kids to read books because they're mean and they force kids to read books. But a lot of times I bet like a lot of the kids are just looking at the book, they're not actually reading. So it just looks like they're reading, but they're actually not. But like I couldn't make my kids read books. And so I would just like waste a lot of time in the beginning of the school year just like creating a classroom library. But I couldn't force my kids to read books. But what I found out was like kids would want, so they wouldn't want to read books, but they would want to read about topics that interested them. For example, like everyone, so I would load up articles about Fortnite for some of my students because they refused to read independently. But it's like, so they would like all fight for that one computer, for that one chance to read with me one-on-one for a specific article about Fortnite. And like I couldn't do that with every kid, unfortunately, and I wished I could be able to do that because they would want to read about something that they're interested in. Unfortunately, they're not interested in the books, in these fiction books. I mean, let's be real, and I hate that people want to force kids to read books when they're just not interested, and it makes sense why. So I hated that part of it because I could never get my kids to independently read, because the only way to get better at reading is just to practice, and they wouldn't practice on their own. So, and a lot of them needed help too, and I couldn't provide help to everyone. Also like I gave a lot of free range for their independent work time. Like I wasn't the teacher who forced them to do like read for a whole 30 minutes. And like I think a lot of them really enjoy that, and that for writing specifically, they had a lot of my students came up with a lot of creative writing things, so that was awesome. And then yeah, also like I wasn't the best at keeping the room like super quiet during independent reading time, which you're supposed to, and you're not supposed to let children move around because they'll get distracted. That's just like a whole nother issue. But Okay, so last topic I want to talk about is, what did I want to talk about? I forgot. Reading, writing. Oh, they removed cursive writing. I made a video about that on my TikTok, but I think that's fine. Like, cursive writing is not a thing anymore. I don't remember what I wanted to mention. But I do remember when I was a kid, like, we did a lot of read alouds as a class, and like, you're not supposed to do that anymore, even though I like still did that, because like some people are like, like, you don't want to force kids to read aloud, which is fine, but it's like, really, you like, and then you can't, when I was a kid, we also like play these games, or, like, find the word in the dictionary in the 4th grade, but it's like, a lot of kids don't know how to use a dictionary. Oh, also independently, like at my first school, we did a lot of independent like worksheets and stuff, which we didn't really do at this school, which was cool, but it's like, I couldn't find anything for my kids to do.